Origin of the Joker? A tale of Skalds and Bards. The legend of the Bard goes back to ancient Celtic mythology, in which a semi-mythical people known as the Tuatha De Danann settled the land and divided into three groups. The third, Danann, became known as the legendary bardic lineage. One of the earliest bards was a Milesian, hailing from modern-day Iberia. His name was Amergin, and he conducted the oldest known Celtic poem. This was used to call upon the spirit of Ireland, bringing down a magical storm created by the Tuatha De Danann druids, in which the Milesians could finally cross safely into land. The battles ensued, and there was great losses on both sides, but the Milesians eventually overcame and won. Moving on, in early medieval times, bards were storytellers, poets, and musicians. They were typically hired by high-ranking officials in courts and homes. In large social events, they would tell of the deeds of their patron, and of which they were paid. For if you did not pay them, or you angered them, they could perform a satire, degrading and humiliating your character. They also performed satires against their employer's enemies, damning them. These poems could affect your position in society. Even if they were false, bards held power in this unique way. They were also genealogists who knew of their tribal line and that of their employers. They played the deeds of their ancestors and tribes' accomplishments, which were intricately passed down through them by word of mouth. And to quote an Irish historian, much of their work consists of extended genealogies and almost journalistic accounts of the deeds of their lords and ancestors. The Irish bard was not necessarily an inspired poet, but rather a professor of literature and letters, highly trained in the use of a polished literary medium, belonging to a hereditary caste of high prestige in a conservative, aristocratic society, and holding an official position therein by virtue of extensive training and knowledge. While they were employed by kings and other powerful figures in Irish society, bards also acted independently and were highly respected individuals for their own power. Irish society focused largely on a fame or shame mentality, which one you received largely depended on if the bard liked you or not. Therefore, many people would go out of their way to please the bards in the hopes that they would get a song or poem composed about them. The Irish people had no illusions about death, knowing that everything eventually died, but they believed that the way into immortality was through a great story that only a bard could compose. This led the bards to have great power among the Irish, because of the ability to provide great fame or shame to any individual.
Dream come the morning, your scent, berries tart, lilac sweet, to dream of raven locks and twisted stormy, of violet eyes glistening as you weep.
Another famous bard comes from the Old Welsh poem known as Skalds, where Amergin, often cited as the Prince of Bards, told the story of the Battle of Caithrith, which took place in modern lowland Scotland around the time 600 AD, in which the Angles defeated the Brythonic tribes in a battle which he was one of 2 or 4 survivors. The men went to Caithrith. They were renowned. Wine and mead from golden cups was their beverage. The year was to them of exalted solemnity. 3 warriors and 300 wearing the golden torques. Of those who hurried forth after the excess of reveling, but 3 escaped by the prowess of the gashing sword. The 2 war dogs of Erin and Senan the dauntless, and myself from the spilling of my blood, the reward of my sacred song. Now moving into Northern Europe, there was the counterpart to the bard known as the Skald or Skop in Germanic literary terms. The word Skald is perhaps ultimately related to Proto-Germanic Skalds, literally meaning sound, voice, shout, or Old High German Skal, sound. Old High German also has Skalsang, song of praise, psalm, and Skellen, which means ring, clang, resound. The Old High German variant stem skeleton, etymologically identical to the Skald stem Proto-Germanic skeldan, means to scold, blame, accuse, or insult. The person doing the insulting is a skelto or skeltari. Now, like the bards, these entertainers were hired by high-ranking officials such as kings and earls, where they also held a position in home and court. They also told of the deeds of their employer and told of heroic poems of their gods. As the etymology of the word suggests, skald in modern English means to scold, which comes from the mocking and taunting among characters in Germanic writings. It is characteristic of the Germanic tradition of poetry that the sacred or heroic cannot be separated from the ecstatic or drunken state, and so crude jesting, compare the Loxana where the poet humorously depicts the gods themselves as quarrelsome and malicious, quality summed up in the concept of wuthos, the name-giving attribute of the god of poetry, Wodenaz. As time progressed, Skalds also held a strong rank in society due to their ability of their self-composed poetry and the ancestors and deeds of the past, which was also passed down to them by word of mouth. The first attested skald in history was known as Bragi the Old, and he writes that he served several Swedish kings, including the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, in which he wrote the story of Ragnar's shield, which he was gifted. Once Jorma and Rekar awakened to an ill dream mid the princes, blood-chained, while swords were swirling. A brawl burst in the dwelling of Randver's royal kinsmen, when the raven-swarthy brothers of Urpar took vengeance for all the bitter sorrows. The bloody dew of corpses o'er the king's couch streaming fell on the floor where severed feet and hands, blood dripping, were seen. In the ale-cupped fountain he fell headlong, gore-blended, on the shield leaf of the bushes of Leafy's land is painted. There stood the shielded swordsman, steel biting, not surrounding, the king's couch, and the brethren, Hamdir and sorely, quickly to the earth were beaten by the prince's order. To the bride of Odin, with hard stones were battered. The swirling weapons Ugar bade Gjuki's race be smitten sore, who from life were eager to ravish Svanhildar's lover, and all pay Jonakar's offspring with the fair piercing weapon, to the render of blues burnies with bitter thrusts and edges. I see the horses slaughter. On the fair shield-rimmed surface, Ragnar gave me this ship with many tales marked on it. I believe it was through these bardic and skaldic traditions that jesters, fools, and the like became a big part of the courts in later medieval times. In some places, minstrel and bard became to be used interchangeably. The term jester of the court is a real phenomenon that has its root in Northern European history. In Germany, Till Eulenspiegel is a folkloric hero dating back to medieval times and ruling each year over Fasching of carnival time, mocking politicians and public figures of their power and authority with political satire like a modern-day court jester. Jesters entertained with a wide variety of skills. Principal among them were song, music, and storytelling, but many also employed acrobatics, juggling, telling jokes such as puns, stereotypes, and imitation, and magic tricks. In old times, jesters had a peculiar place in society, such that they could point out certain aspects or characteristics about a person or situation that might have been true but would seem inappropriate. In Scotland, Mary Queen of the Scots had a jester named Nicola. Her son, King James of Scotland, employed a jester called Archibald Armstrong. During his lifetime, Armstrong was given great honors at court. He was eventually thrown out of the king's employment when he overreached and assaulted too many influential people. Even after his disgrace, books telling of his jests were sold in London streets. He held some influence at court, still in the reign of Charles I and Estates of Ireland. Now the movie The Man Who Laughs appears to be the largest influence on the modern-day Joker, and comes from a 1928 movie based in the 1600s, where a jester betrays a Lord Clancharlie, having him executed, and his son becomes permanently disfigured with an everlasting grin and green hair. It would appear that the legacy of Skalds and Bards has been left to the entertainers of today. The Skalds and Bards come from a tradition of entertainment. They were storytellers, musicians, poets, and held a position in court. This was given then to jesters. Jesters became the new entertainers. And this gave way to who we know as the Joker. One lasting tradition of Skalds and Bards, preserved by the Joker,
You know what's funny?
dark satire poetry.
You know what really makes me laugh? I used to think that my life was a tragedy. But now I realize it's a fucking comedy.